In the last lecture, we looked at basically, I mentioned the complexity of the life forms. And basically, life is nothing but the materials. But not only this general material, but specifically something, the material which is important to life is what? Organic macromolecules. Okay. So in that respect, we just briefly mentioned the 4 different types of organic macromolecules and the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and in particular why eukaryotes only had that organelles, and what's the importance of having the organelles regarding with what the compartmentalization, right? So in the continuation of those characteristics of both prokaryote and eukaryote life form, let's continue on. So in eukaryotes, not only do they have this cell, the membrane-bound nucleus within which their genetic material are organized in the form of chromosomes, right? But also they do have so many different organelles because they need them, right, for their specific function, or in particular the specific chemical reaction, because their cell size is huge compared with the prokaryote. But also something, this multicellularity. So this characteristic can only be found in eukaryotes. Multicellular. We are multicellular organism. So as an adult, probably we have several trillions of cells consist of one individual adult human. So we can see many different examples of multicellular organisms. And actually the fact of the matter is you can only, it's better? You can only see this multicellular organism within the boundary of eukaryotes only. In some cases, you may be able to find some prokaryote bacteria cells simply living together in multiple forms, but they are not, technically, they are not truly, they are multicellular. They are simply colonial forms. They are living together. So what's the distinction between true multicellular versus simple colonial forms? Anybody? Multicellular and simply just a clump of cells. Similarities are they are, both of them consist of many cells. But one is regarded as a multicellular, but the other one is just still, no, you're not. You're fake. You're not a true multicellular. So what's the difference? That's my question. And that question is very important. Yes. Multicellular divide themselves? So they do. I mean, the colonial clump of cells, they can simply increase their numbers through similar mechanism of the cell division. So in that regards, yeah, they look similar. This one. Think about origin. Yeah, no matter how many cells we have by now, I and you both, we are all adults, so we have tons of different cells. But if we try to remember our beginning, we began from what? Single cell, fertilized egg, right? And that fertilized egg, how we ended up, there's so many, trillions of different cells. But the beauty is, I mean, the interesting thing is, we started from a single cell through this mechanical automatic cell division. It kept dividing, so increases the number. In other words, the descendants of this, the result of this cell division contain exactly identical the entity of a genetic material. They are the clones, right? So it should be identical, but when we look at ourselves, here, type of cells are different. There, the size of type of cells are different. So every different part, we have different types, different looking, and different function. The reason they look different is because they function differently. Okay, that's a very important thing also. The reason why brain cells look so different from the liver cells or some other part of the cells is because their functions are different. Okay, so that type of differentiation, yeah, that's what we call it, the differentiation. Okay, and that differentiation is the key to this, the accomplishment of a multicellularity. In other words, if you simply forget about the laboratory or whatever, if you neglect this differentiation part during your cell division in the course of your development, okay, you are not actually. You are simply nothing but a whole lump of what I would call cancer. So cancer, one definition of a cancer is undifferentiated cell. And that's cancerous. So we have to, everyone try to get rid of those undifferentiated part of your body because it is really doing so much harm to this well organized, well coordinated, well differentiated part of entire body. So the try to become multicellular organism is one, you have to keep one really golden rule of different part of your body to become tissues, different tissues. The definition of different tissue means here, some different part, we do function differently from the other part. So the secret behind this differentiation is, guess what? Of course, it's the gene. That's another mystery. Because by definition, every different part of our cells inherited exactly same content, same genes, but still they behave differently. They act differently. You are nothing but what your gene gave you, but how come you look different and you behave different? That's really another mystery of this your cell in the form of this gene activity. For example, if you try to think about, hey, what do you think about, for example, hemoglobin? Everybody knows what hemoglobin does. It's a protein, and its functional hemoglobin protein is what? Carry out oxygen, yes. Deliver the oxygen to all different part of your body, which is essential. So that hemoglobin protein is made by what? Hemoglobin gene. But that hemoglobin protein is only made in where? Can your brain cell make hemoglobin protein? No. Why not? Because they don't have this gene anymore? They do. Every different part of your cell still has same exact gene, every gene, including this hemoglobin gene, but for some reason, they don't make this protein anymore. Only your red blood cell still remember, oh, I had a hemoglobin gene, so I gotta make them. So that's the key to this differentiation. Different part of your body cells will utilize different subsets of genes. Let's say you inherited 100. In the beginning, when you were a fertilized egg, let's say you had 100 genes, to simplify. In fact, actually, you had more than 23,000 genes, but whatever, 100 genes. But then, when you become differentiated to become different types of cells or different types of tissues, only you do not utilize, you do not activate all 100 genes what you had, but simply you have a choice. Among these 100, I only choose 10 of these 100 to my preferences. So that's how you maintain and manifest this differential nature of development. So anyway, uh, let's go. Another thing is, especially if you are a multicellular organism, so here you began as a single cell, and if you decide to become a multicellular organism like most of the eukaryotes, and then you soon organize after a while of cell division, you organize different tissues, and then different tissues gather together to become different organs, right? And some of the different organs work together to establish something called the organ system, like a circulatory system or endocrine system or nervous system or blah, 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 blah. Okay. So that's how you build up. So overall, it's called the hierarchical organization of life until you reach as a one individual organism level. So in other words, as a multicellular organism, if you dissect any single multicellular organism, then the sub-organization level would be go down like down to the hierarchy, like organ system, then organ and tissues and cell levels. So in other words, if you unfortunately happen to be a single cellular, unicellular organism like yeast, what do you miss? Something that the organization level you are missing as a single celled organism like bacteria or yeast would be what? Here. Which different level of organization can you not find in the single unicellular organism? It's so simple. Organism? No, they do still have an organism. They do have this cell. But in between these whole three things, yeah, they don't have these three different levels of organization because they are simply only single cell is their own entire organism itself. So they can't afford. There is no room for them to build this tissue organ and organ system. To do so, they need multiples of a cell, and then more importantly, they need to do what? In order to build this type of organization, like a tissue, and go up, build organ, and further organ system, you need to do go through what? That's what I've been preaching for like 10 minutes until now. Yeah, exactly. So could you say it louder? Even louder, please. Differentiation. Yes, exactly. Thank you. So that's what it is, and that's why it is so important to become a real, true functional multicellular organisms. So this hierarchy, and this hierarchical organization's characteristic actually go beyond the level of the individual, so that like population and can go up to community and go up to ecosystem and finally a whole entire earth, we call it a biosphere. Population, yes. Can anyone guess the definition of a population by just simply looking at this figure? So to your eyes, what do you see the differences between the label population and community? In the figure of population, you see so many same organism, same kind. So it's the same species. So the population defines that any space where you can find only single species of organism. Okay, then you call them as a population. But in reality, there's no way you can find only one single population in anywhere you go. Yeah. Here, you may consider we are all same population of human, but no, it's not. You do not see any of those bacteria floating around? Yeah, I do. I see it. I see them. You don't see? Oh, poor. And there's a rat over there. You don't see? Oh, okay. So this is not subway, New York subway, so you cannot see any rat. So that's the population. So the difference in community means multiples of the different species. So that's more realistic, okay, observation you would encounter whenever you go. And what about this ecosystem? The same local, so you can find and discuss this concept of an ecosystem within the exactly same like physical local area. But the difference between community and ecosystem would be here in ecosystem, now you begin to include what are the factors. Like not only the living things, but also now you get to include what? The environmental factors within that local area where these community live. That's the definition of ecosystem. And biosphere, simply you expand this ecosystem, the concept, to what? The level of entire Earth. That's the biosphere. Okay. Well, now, I'm not interested in asking any trivial questions about this population, community ecosystem, or like tissue organ system, except like the kind of brief question that I threw, like what would the single cellular organism miss within this different hierarchy? But that's the only kind of potential question I might actually bring to the table of the exam, the midterm exam. But this one is actually something that I see more seriously, emergent property. So this emergent property concept is because of this, the way the living things are organized into like the ladders, into higher, more complex hierarchy of this organization. Now, at different level of this hierarchy, you get to observe totally new, unexpected characteristic, and you call that as an emergent property. Anyone know the Korean for this emergent property? Anybody? Oh, you do? You do? If you can bear with my handwriting, yes, that would be. Uh, so that's emergent property. What is it? And if you actually look at the definition, original definition of the emergent property, then it would make you more confused. What? It doesn't add up. Mathematically speaking, it doesn't add up. What do you mean by that? The whole is greater than the sum of its components? It should be equal. But that's the definition of the emergent property. So in other words, like more down to earth definition of emergent property would be like this. So like if you try to apply this emergent property concept to this life hierarchy, then at each different level. So now you are kind of content with, you're satisfied. Oh, I studied everything. So I'm so comfortable about the characteristic of all these cells. I think I kind of know that what cells made of and what do they do, kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, now these cells become tissue. So by definition, what are tissues? Tissues are simply the collection of cells. But then all of a sudden, at tissue level, you get to find totally new characteristics that you haven't been able to find at the cellular level. When you study only cells, even if you just kind of pretty sure that you study everything that a single cell offered. But then when those cells became tissue, oops, where did it come from? Totally new thing you observe. That's kind of example of emergent property. And now you can go up organ level. Now that the complexity and the confusion seems to be like even higher or even worse, depending on how you say it. So at every different levels, for example, like brains. What's brain? Brains are nothing but a pile of your nervous tissue, which are made of neuron cells. So let's say you study so hard the function and anatomy and all the structure of a single neuron cells. So you kind of mastered the function and characteristic, chemical and biochemical, biophysical, whatever, of a single neuron cell. But then when you try to study brain, suddenly intelligence, what is it? Where did it come from? Now you get to see intelligence, the characteristics. But you cannot understand whatever, no matter what you do, you can understand intelligence by simply studying single neurons. So that's type of emergent property. So actually, this emergent property is not only something that can be found in biology. You can actually find the emergent property everywhere, almost everywhere. For example, let's say when you walk in a garage, and then you found at the bottom floor of a garage, all different parts of bicycles were all scattered around. And if you didn't know anything about these mechanical things of bicycle, you would have no idea about what these whole different small pieces, parts would do. And then someone else came in, walked in, and then assembled all different parts so nicely, and then voila, this is a bicycle. And then went away with the bicycle. Then what? what would be your reaction? Wow, emergent property. That's it. That's the nature of emergent property. So in biology too, when someone says emergent property, that actually is something equal to you are confessing then how stupid you were. That's it. You just marvel at some kind of new characteristic, new feature of whatever you call it, emergent property. But simply, in fact, is that you were not smart enough to understand, grasp of the whole complexity of different things. That's why you get to see emergent property. So, especially it's type of especially one reason why we were so um, bothered by this observation of emergent property might be due to the way we are trained in studying the science. In studying the science, usually traditionally we take this type of approach, the reductionist approach. What that is, you want to know something about this, okay? Oh, I don't know how it works. Then what would be the best way of understanding the mechanical secret of this wristwatch or whatever? Take it take it apart, and then you just dissect everything and disassemble and study each different part. That's how you usually traditionally study the science, because it's really, really good for studying and understanding some very complex uh, principle. Then you always try to disassemble and take one piece at a time to understand how it works. And then later, you just combine all this, your knowledge, piece them, put together, and then now you try to understand in a little more comprehensive way. That's how you try to understand the complexity of science. Okay? But unfortunately, so this has been the traditional, the best way of studying the life too. Then it turns out that life is way too more complex than we can handle through this reductionist approach. Like this, when you actually type in Google that emergent property, and somehow, if you're lucky, you may encounter this exact figure. What do you think? Why do you think this figure illustrates the concept of emergent property? Can anyone? What's got to do with this emergent property? I don't get it. But this figure is something that was made exactly to explain or illustrate the concept of emergent property. Yes, exactly. So pieces, let's say these little pieces are cell. So no matter how hard you study its little pieces, but there is no way you can predict whether this thing will build this or that or that. That's life. Why would they have any chance to build some different options of the reality? Why? Because it depends at different occasions, depends on their different kind of interactions. Little component, life little component, randomly will encounter some different opportunities of complex interactions. So the keyword would be interaction. But not only the interaction, but complex interactions. So you cannot really predict, because in order to correctly predict all different occasions of a possible interaction, your brain will blow out. It takes huge memory of algorithm. Maybe AI, maybe artificial intelligence might be able to eventually correctly predict all different occasions of this. Yeah, that's true. So now people have learned. So yeah, we've been wrong. So we shouldn't keep our traditional approach of studying this life anymore. So now we should take different approach, which is this. So even the name of this department has been changed because of that. Before 3 years ago or 5 years ago, this department name was simply Department of Life Science. Now it became what? Department of System Biology. What's the difference? This approach. So instead, traditionally, even when I was receiving the PhD training when I was in graduate school, I've been trained in this way. Like you only focus on one thing, assuming that probably that's the gene. The gene you are focusing would be the most important gene of entire world. Everybody was fooled, okay, deliberately or reluctantly, and that's how they did it. And then each different PhD became very narrow expert, of course, but it became useless. Soon realized, yeah, it seems that you know something very well, deep level, but it doesn't give you anything. You cannot contribute anything in elucidating the actual real life, the mystery or beauty or whatever. So then it's time to change into what? This type of approach. So instead of looking at only single thing at a time, but always try to look at whole entire thing once. Why? Because you have to consider, you have to take all these different complex interaction into account. So you never know what different component in real life would interact and then produce some unexpected circumstances. You never know. So that's how you try to look at differently in systems biology. So would your poor brain be able to handle those different complexity? Hell no, you can't. So you will get help from what? Computer. Please help us. So the computer become a real essential component in performing the systems biology. And totally different approach, looking at all different complex things at a time and then try to figure out their interaction and result consequences of such interaction is what the system biology will try to achieve. Okay, so yeah, good. So keep going. Technology advance, fine. So that's something that regarding with the complexity of life and their hierarchical organization. When that is one characteristic the emergent property that we should also focus, because not because of this actual the nature of the surprise nature to us, but the real reason why get to see this so-called emergent property and how we respond to the problem is the actually theme, the keyword of this emergent property. Now, turning the page into another aspect of life, which is diversity of life. So, the diversity of life you can easily find while you are sitting in this classroom. Everyone looks different. So, we are all by nature different, diverse. Yeah. But what does it tell you? Why? Uh, so even we are members of the same species of human, Homo sapiens, but still within a single species, same species, we display so many different this diversity. So what? I mean, how far can we go in terms of this finding the differences? What's the end of this, like, distinction? You are different from me on the basis of what? And so what's the result? And so all this different thing, diversity, technically speaking, will culminate in this the boundary of different species. It's not. I'm not saying that within the species there is no diversity as you can easily see, but also this the maintenance of some specific characteristic difference will be kept or will be maintained within the boundary of a species. And that's why this trying to draw the line between two different species became critical. So we know that there are so many different types of organisms we distinguish by so-called different names of species, like so many different numbers are not important. Who cares whether there is a 1.8 million different species or whatever? But more importantly, there is only so-called tips of the iceberg, 10 times as many different kind of species we didn't even bother to find. So that means there are so many different species. And these differences in species is not, by no means is a static. It's dynamic. It keeps changing. So even today, like at this moment, probably so many new different species would emerge somewhere we don't know, and so many different other species would extinct. So that's the dynamic nature of these differences in species. So even when you try to the butterflies and mosses, look at so many different things within this small spaces can you find. So all these differences actually, if you try to think about the origin, how did they have so many different kinds of organism have arisen? Then we these whole professionals would offer an explanation as, yeah, that's because of an evolution. Oh, really? Because the end result of any single different individual event of evolution will end with the birth of a new species. Okay. Only you call, evolution has occurred. How do you know? Because there is something new species has been created. Like, in other words, let's say evolution, so to speak, vaguely, however you may kind of expect the concept. Individual level so-called evolution may occur, like, for example, corona resistance, so to speak. Okay? Every different individual will have a different type of resistance to the horrible viruses like a coronavirus or anything. So some would be more vulnerable than the others. On the other hand, some would be more resistant. Okay? So if one individual in this classroom have somehow evolved a super resistance against this nasty coronavirus, can we call that as an evolution of a new mechanism of resistance against coronavirus? Individually, yeah, but that doesn't actually, by definition, that doesn't say anything about actual evolution. Evolution always has to finish in the form of at the species level. Just one single individual, or even one single individual, somehow luckily developed some kind of new mutation, which result in some strong resistance, super resistance against some nasty things. Well, good for you as a one individual. But unless that gene is widespread in this population, so that actual character, that so-called super resistance became the characteristic trait. This is T. Does everyone understand the definition of a trait? If not, anyone who is not comfortable with this definition, a trait? For example, trait. Can you name example of any trait? All these characteristics are actually traits, but there is a certain distinction. For example, character versus trait. Character. When we refer a character, there are so many different characters. All of them are actually determined by different genes. But character, for example, human height would be one such character. Human intelligence would be one such character. Skin color would be another character. Right? Eye color, a character. Resistance to some kind of a disease, so specific disease like corona would be another character. But within each different character, now you have a so variety of different array or the range of the trait. Human height, tall, short, medium, so many different traits exist under one specific single character of what we call human height. Skin color, same thing. Dark, light, medium, so many different skin colors are examples of different traits within, under the skin color character. Eye color, same thing. Right? So that's the difference, because all these different characters, each single character is determined by activity of a specific gene. Gene will allow you to have a different type of trait within the category of some such character. Anybody still not comfortable with this definition? Great, thank you. So, this trait, in other words, to declare, oh, we have evolved something, a new trait, something, then that trait should become like a representative. One representative, one species. It's not something that trait is some unique character of one single individual, but that specific trait should be able to be found, easily found in a dominant most of these members of the population. Then can you call that, oh, a new evolution has occurred? You're not agreeing with it? You you look, oh, I don't like that definition. It's not? Yes or no? It's okay? Okay. So anyway, so evolution should occur at the level of population. That's what is being said. So how any different specific characters or a trait became a representative feature of a single species be usually through this procedure. Uh, so, for example, this is human. Oh, human. This is chimpanzee. What? Okay. So at the bottom of this, we call it as a common ancestor of human and chimpanzee. That's the latest evolutionary relationship between human and chimpanzee, like from the common ancestor. So, like long time ago, for example, like 100,000 years ago, anything, right? According to this evolutionary biologist, there were times that there's no way we can distinguish the difference between our ancestral human, and then their ancestral chimpanzee. Everybody was all kind of a common ancestral form. Then now the difference became greater and greater. For example, somehow some small group of this common ancestral population of this, whatever they call the common ancestor of the human and chimpanzee, obtained some specific mutation which distinguish them from the rest of this group. And this small, although in the beginning they may be minority, but for some reason there are small change in their genes, so that mutation became advantageous under certain environmental condition. So now those who carry this mutation were able to reproduce better and more. So now they could establish one big group. Now the thing is, if when they had some differences in mutation, so as a new trait, hey, I had a new trait. So then they reproduce, so they produce some of their children's. So, but still, the number of their group is also so small. But still, their new genes were so selectively advantageous, so they were able to rapidly increase their numbers. Whoever carried these new genes should be able to do well under such circumstances. Now, because of such isolation, when they were in the same common ancestral stages, they would be able to interbreed. They mate and produce children. For example, like probably a lot of you might have heard by now that Neanderthals and the Homo sapiens were able to interbreed and then produce offspring. Right? So that kind of interbreed, mate and produce offspring, children who are okay, viable. If that is the case, the new genes will spread everywhere as long as they can exchange their genes. Reproduction is what? Sexual reproduction means exchanging their genes. Hey, I have something good, so we can share. So gene spread, gene exchange can still occur within the same population. However, when some differences kept two different members, two different groups of the population from mating, and then reproductive isolation has occurred, then now some development and changes will uh, keep within that small newly emerged mutant group of a small population, and then difference between two big group would become greater and greater. And then all of a sudden, after for a while, these two groups became so different, and they no longer mate each other to produce offspring. That means their gene exchange is blocked. And that's the point. That's the beginning point of the birth of a new species. So once that happened, then this separated whole independent group now will start on their own within themselves to further evolve into something totally different from the other cousin, so to speak, cousin group. So that's how you usually observe in the course of evolution. So because of that, the new mutation creating a new trait would end up in the new creation of new species, and it will be maintained is the concept because of the reason. So these days, there are so many different big groups of different organisms, including bacteria, eukaryote, and even some other bacteria are slightly different from the bacteria that we know. That different group of bacteria, by the way, we call archaebacteria, archaea, like sounding like a more ancient bacteria, whatever. These are, both of them are prokaryotes and eukaryotes. But whatever they are, still, all of them, generally, biologists believe that generally all these different groups of organisms began as a single common ancestor. The beginning, the first ancestor, probably, ancestor form of a common ancestor, which is called the LUCA, standing for last universal common ancestor. Why it would be the last? Even though it seems like the first type of common ancestor, because we are going backward. Fine. So here, every branch point, we have more recent common ancestor. It's fine. But if you go further and further in the more ancient days of the past, then finally we reach to the beginning point, which now, from our present point, that would have been the last common ancestor. That's why we call that as a LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. And like more professionally, there are so many different, it's a big group. Such a big group in that, if you think about even this eukaryote, big names of different eukaryote branches. But how many of these different branches can you actually recognize? Among these different names, how many of them you are familiar with? Perhaps this, animals, you know. How about fungi? You know. Plants, you know. What else? Do you know some ciliates? Oh, you do. Good. Good for you. Ciliates. And slime molds, flagellate. So many different group of all eukaryotes. Okay? But actually, among eukaryotes, those group of eukaryotes that you are more familiar with are very minority. Majority of them are something really uh, very different, diverse, and so many, but we don't really consider them as an important thing. But they do exist, so many different. By the way, all these different eukaryotes, other than this, the big three, like animal, fungi, plant, are called what? Protists. They are all eukaryotes, and also they do have a nucleus and organelles, but they are usually tiny, usually unicellular, like amoeba, like creatures. They are all so many different diverse group of protists. And not to mention about all different kinds of prokaryotes like archaebacteria and bacteria too. Okay, so this evolution change, in order to create some new evolution to showcase in the form of new species, you have to begin with change in your gene because you have to change your trait. That's simple as it is. Like your trait is determined by your gene, at least. There is another story later, but for now, traditionally, or traditional concept uh, declare that this is almost like doctrine trait. All the traits are determined by genes. That's, that's the basis of genetics established by Gregor Mendel. Although he himself didn't understand what exactly the genes are, but that's correct. The definition of all these different traits are actually the result of a different gene action. So that's classical view of genetics. Remember, I emphasize the classical. Modern days, there are some new revolutionary idea emerged. Okay? But let's talk about that new thing later on, not today. But anyway, so all these things, uh, the evolution means that your gene has to change, and that change will result in a trait, and then the new trait will maintain and improve or whatever change. I shouldn't say improve because improve is such a like arbitrary terms. So that trait will change again and again over time. You need long time. That's the kind of condition and the process of evolution. And the actual driving force of this evolution is perhaps everyone, almost everyone, every one of you might have heard this terminology, natural selection, here and there in your life. So, and how this natural selection became a driving force of creating a new evolution would take some time. So I don't think we have enough time to finish today. This is how this natural selection will operate to create a new evolution. So it's a shame. So, but now I'm going to continue on this natural selection and then how it created a new evolution next Monday to create all these different type of adaptation, new things will be beginning topic of next Monday's lecture. Okay, so have a nice, great evening and nice weekend, and see you on next Monday.